In one of New York's most expensive restaurants, a billionaire spotted a young waitress and decided she would be his next conquest. With a snap of his fingers, he made a shocking proposal in front of everyone. But what happened next left the entire restaurant in stunned silence, and the billionaire wishing he'd never opened his mouth. The arrogant entrance. The story begins in the heart of New York City, on a night when the streets outside glimmered with yellow cab headlights, flashing billboards, and the endless hum of the city that never sleeps. Inside one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants, Le Magnifique, the atmosphere was entirely different. Here, time seemed to slow. The lighting was golden and warm. Soft piano music filled the air, and the sound of crystal glasses, clinking together, blended with the low murmur of wealthy patrons discussing deals worth millions. This was no ordinary restaurant. The chandeliers above were imported from Italy, their crystals shaped and cut to perfection, throwing tiny rainbows across the marble floor. Every chair was upholstered with velvet, and every table was set with silver cutlery polished so brightly it looked untouched. It was the kind of place only the city's richest could afford, where a single meal could cost more than most people's monthly rent. And into this temple of wealth and luxury walked a man who thought he owned the world. His name was Charles Sterling. Billionaire, hotel mogul, real estate king. A man whose face often appeared on the covers of glossy business magazines, smiling with the kind of confidence only power and money could buy. But beneath that smile was arrogance, an unshakable belief that everything and everyone around him existed for his pleasure. The moment Charles pushed open the grand glass doors, the room shifted. Conversations hushed, heads turned, staff members stiffened, their eyes darting toward him. He was the kind of man whose presence demanded attention, not because he was kind or noble, but because he carried himself as if the ground beneath him was unworthy of his footsteps. Dressed in a custom-tailored suit worth more than most people's yearly salaries, Charles walked with a swagger that came from years of getting whatever he wanted. 2 assistants trailed behind him, carrying his coat, phone, and even a leather folder filled with contracts. To them, he wasn't just a boss. He was practically a king, and they behaved like loyal servants. The maître d', nervous but eager to please, hurried forward. "Mr. Sterling!" "What an honor. Your table is ready, sir." Charles didn't bother to acknowledge him with words. Instead, he gave a small nod, the kind that said, "I expected nothing less." His cold blue eyes swept across the restaurant as if inspecting his kingdom, deciding which part of it would entertain him for the evening. The staff scrambled like chess pieces around him. Chairs were pulled back, menus brought forward, the best wine offered. Yet despite all this, Charles wasn't interested in the food or the atmosphere. He wasn't there for the steak, the wine, or the music. He was there for something, or rather, someone else. That's when he noticed her. Across the room, weaving gracefully between tables, was a waitress. Her name was Maya. She was young, no older than her mid-20s, with deep brown skin that glowed in the golden light of the chandeliers. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, balancing trays of food effortlessly, offering warm smiles to guests, and listening attentively to their requests. There was something different about Maya. Unlike many staff members who bent and bowed under the weight of wealthy customers, she never lost her poise. She wasn't arrogant, but she wasn't timid either. She worked with dignity, and that dignity seemed to shine through even in the smallest of gestures. The way she adjusted a guest's napkin, the way she made eye contact instead of staring at the floor, the way she spoke politely but firmly, and it was that dignity that caught Charles's attention. His eyes narrowed, a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. To him, Maya wasn't just another waitress serving expensive food. No, she was a challenge, someone who didn't immediately fall at his feet. And for a man like Charles, that was all the more reason to want her. He leaned slightly toward one of his assistants and whispered, "Who's that?" The assistant followed his gaze. "Just one of the staff, sir." "Not just one of the staff," Charles replied, his voice dripping with entitlement. "There's something about her. I like that fire. She'll serve me tonight, and not just at this table." The assistant gave a knowing smile. He had seen this before. Charles Sterling was infamous for targeting women he found attractive, no matter their position, no matter their situation. To him, money was the ultimate weapon, one he used to break down walls, erase boundaries, and claim what he wanted. And in Charles's mind, Maya was already his next conquest. But Charles Sterling, for all his wealth, had just made one grave mistake. He thought Maya was like everyone else. He thought she would bow. He thought she would trade her pride for his money. He thought his billions could buy not only luxury but people's souls. What he didn't know was that Maya was nothing like the women he was used to. She was about to show him that some people cannot be bought. Some people have something far more valuable than all the money in the world. Self-respect? And Charles was about to learn that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. The disrespectful proposal. Charles Sterling had been watching Maya carefully, the way a predator studies its prey, the clinking of cutlery, the gentle laughter from other tables, and the soothing piano in the background faded in his mind. All that mattered to him now was the waitress moving gracefully between the tables, her apron tied neatly, her hair pulled back, her every gesture steady and confident. When Maya approached his table to check on the guests, Charles didn't wait politely like a normal customer. Instead, he lifted his hand and snapped his fingers sharply, like a master calling for a servant. The sound cut through the air, sharp and humiliating. "You there," he barked, his voice low but commanding, the kind of tone that demanded obedience. "Bring me the best bottle of wine in this place. And hurry." The nearby diners glanced up briefly, some raising eyebrows at his rude behavior, but no one dared to speak up. Charles Sterling was a man of influence, and people were used to letting his arrogance slide. But Maya was different. She did not flinch. She did not show annoyance, nor did she grovel like many of the staff often did in fear of offending rich customers. Instead, she gave him the same professional smile she gave every guest. Her voice was calm, even, and firm as she replied, "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with it." Charles watched her leave, his cold blue eyes narrowing as his smirk deepened. "Confident one, isn't she?" he muttered to his assistant, who stood quietly beside the table. The assistant chuckled knowingly. "Yes, sir. But confidence doesn't usually last long when you make your offers." Charles leaned back, tapping his fingers on the polished mahogany table. "We'll see about that." Moments later, Maya returned, carrying the bottle of wine carefully. She set it down with practiced precision, presenting the label before preparing to open it. As she did, Charles leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze shamelessly running up and down her figure. To him, Maya wasn't a person doing her job. She was something to be evaluated, like another piece of luxury he might purchase. He whispered something to his assistant, who smirked again. Then Charles finally spoke directly to Maya. His tone shifted from commanding to falsely charming, dripping with arrogance. "You know," he began, swirling the glass of wine lazily once she poured it, "you're wasted working here, serving drinks to people who barely notice you. A woman like you should be living in style, not running around carrying trays." Maya's eyes lifted to his, polite but unreadable. "I enjoy my work, sir," she said evenly. Charles chuckled. "Enjoy? Don't kid yourself. You could have so much more." He leaned forward now, lowering his voice, but ensuring it carried enough weight to sound like an invitation and a challenge all at once. "I could give you more money in one night than you make here in a month. All you have to do is keep me company, privately." The words dropped like heavy stones into the air between them. His assistant grinned, clearly used to this routine. The waiters nearby stiffened, but deliberately kept their eyes down, pretending not to hear. They had witnessed this side of Charles before, and none dared interfere. It was safer to act blind, but Maya froze, her hand still holding the wine bottle. Her smile faded, replaced by a sudden stillness. In that instant she understood. This was not some clumsy attempt at flirting. This was not a compliment. This was an insult, calculated and deliberate. An attempt to strip her of dignity, to reduce her to nothing more than an object for his pleasure. For a few moments, Maya said nothing. Instead, she leaned slightly closer to Charles, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone firm but quiet. Charles mistook her calmness for interest. He smirked wider, believing he had hooked her curiosity. "Oh, don't play shy," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false charm. "You know exactly what I mean. You're beautiful, confident. I like that. Come with me tonight. I'll make it worth your while." He lifted his glass and took a slow sip, as if the deal was already sealed. "I always do." He didn't notice the way Maya's jaw tightened, or the fire beginning to spark in her eyes. He didn't realize that the woman standing before him was not like the others he had toyed with. Charles Sterling thought his money could buy anything. But in that moment, he had just underestimated the one thing money could never touch: a woman's self-respect. And Maya was about to remind him, loudly, clearly, and in front of everyone, that no amount of wealth could purchase her pride. The bold response. For a few long seconds, silence blanketed the table. The only sound was the faint hum of the piano and the distant clink of a spoon against glass from across the restaurant. Charles Sterling, billionaire mogul and self-proclaimed king of every room he entered, waited for the usual reaction: a nervous laugh, a shy smile, a hesitant nod. But Maya didn't give him any of that. Instead, she straightened her back slowly, setting the wine bottle firmly on the table with a soft but deliberate thunk. Then she crossed her arms, her entire posture shifting from that of a waitress serving a guest to a woman who was about to make herself heard. The restaurant seemed to sense it. The air tightened, conversations dipped, forks paused midair. Something was about to happen. Maya's eyes locked on Charles's, unblinking, sharp and steady. She didn't stammer. She didn't hesitate. She didn't let the weight of his wealth, his power, or the eyes of the room shake her composure. And then, with a voice calm but loud enough to carry across the restaurant, she spoke. "You must think your money makes you powerful. But all I see is a lonely man who believes respect can be bought." The words hit the table like a slap. Charles's smug smile flickered, his jaw tightening. His assistant's eyes went wide, his mouth hanging open. A low murmur rippled through the nearby diners. Disbelieving whispers, gasps, even a stifled laugh. No one had ever dared to speak to Charles Sterling like this. Certainly not in public. But Maya wasn't finished. Her tone sharpened, like a blade being drawn. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I serve food, not my body, and certainly not to men who think snapping their fingers gives them the right to insult me." The billionaire's smirk collapsed completely now, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. He glanced around, realizing with horror that people were watching, listening, judging. His empire of control was crumbling in real time, all because a woman he thought he could buy was refusing him so boldly. Still, Maya's words cut deeper. She leaned in just enough so her presence towered over the table, her voice sharp enough to pierce the silence around them. "You might own hotels," she said, her tone slow and deliberate, "but you'll never own people. Not me, not anyone. So take your money, your arrogance, and your empty offers, and keep them far away from me." The impact of her words was seismic. A woman at a nearby table clapped a hand over her mouth in shock. Another whispered, "Did she just say that to him?" A man at the bar chuckled quietly, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the waitstaff, who had perfected the art of invisibility, risked glances in her direction, their eyes wide with admiration. Charles Sterling sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His assistant leaned closer, whispering urgently, "Sir, maybe we should," but stopped himself when Charles shot him a deathly glare. But no glare, no scowl, no amount of unspoken threat could undo what had just happened. Charles, the untouchable billionaire, had been called out, loudly, clearly, publicly. And the sting wasn't just in the rejection, it was in the truth. Maya didn't just say no. She stripped away the illusion of his power, exposed the hollowness behind the wealth, and reminded him and everyone watching that money was worthless when stacked against dignity. The whispers grew louder, some diners openly staring, others pretending to return to their meals but clearly tuned in. The pianist faltered on a few notes before continuing. The restaurant itself seemed to lean into the drama, as if every wall, every chandelier, every glass of wine was bearing witness to this moment. Maya, meanwhile, stood tall and unshaken. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't mock. Her words had been sharp, but her face was composed. She hadn't lost her temper. She had simply stated the truth with unbreakable confidence. And that made her words even more powerful. For the first time in years, Charles Sterling had no comeback. The man who could out-talk boardrooms, intimidate politicians, and silence rivals sat there stunned, his reputation unraveling before the very people whose approval he craved. Most, the wealthy elite of Manhattan. Maya took a small step back, letting the silence swallow the moment. Then, in a voice firm but respectful, she added, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other guests who actually value kindness more than arrogance." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high, her steps steady and graceful. She didn't need to stay to watch the aftermath. She had said what needed to be said. And in that restaurant, under the glow of golden chandeliers, everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A billionaire humbled, not by another man of power, but by a waitress who refused to be bought. The stunning silence. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Charles Sterling was silent. The man who dominated boardrooms with booming speeches, who crushed competitors with razor-sharp words, now sat frozen at his table. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. His face flushed deep red, a storm of anger, humiliation, and disbelief burning under his skin. He had expected laughter, agreement, or at worst, awkward silence when he made his indecent proposal. What he never expected was this: a public rejection, sharp and merciless, delivered with dignity by a woman he thought he could buy. Charles's chest rose and fell quickly, his breathing shallow. He wanted to say something. Anything. A cutting insult, a commanding threat, a dismissive laugh, but every possible response dissolved on his tongue. And while he struggled, the restaurant came alive around him. At first, the room was wrapped in stunned quiet. Forks hovered above plates. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. And every eye in the room turned toward the billionaire. Patrons who had once admired him, envied him, or feared him now studied him like an animal caught in a trap. Then it began. From a corner table, a single diner, an older gentleman in a gray suit, brought his hands together in a slow, deliberate clap. Clap, clap, clap. The sound echoed like thunder in the fragile silence. Another diner, a woman in a red dress, smirked and joined in. Then a man at the bar followed. Within seconds, the restaurant erupted into applause. Half the room was clapping, some smiling in approval, others outright laughing at the billionaire's humiliation. The irony was thick. A man used to commanding admiration and fear was now the subject of mockery. Charles Sterling, the untouchable mogul, was being applauded, not for his power or wealth, but for being put in his place. His assistant looked horrified, eyes darting nervously between the applauding customers and his boss. He leaned closer, whispering urgently, "Sir, maybe we should leave before this escalates." His voice shook, betraying a fear of being caught in his employer's downfall. Charles didn't respond. His glare was fixed on the table. His jaw clenched so tightly, a vein throbbed in his temple. His fingers drummed furiously against the wood, as if sheer frustration could erase what had just happened. But Maya? She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or bask in the glory of her victory. Instead, she moved with the same calm professionalism she had shown all evening. She gave the table a polite nod, placed the bottle of wine down gently, and said in a clear, steady voice, "Enjoy your evening, sir." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her head high, her stride steady and graceful. She didn't need the applause. She didn't need validation. Her power came from within, and everyone in the restaurant could feel it. The applause followed her steps as she moved back toward the kitchen. But she never once looked over her shoulder. That dignity, the refusal to revel in his humiliation, only made her stand taller in the eyes of everyone watching. Charles, on the other hand, felt the walls closing in on him. Every clap, every smirk, every whisper was a dagger in his pride. His empire of intimidation had crumbled in less than 5 minutes, and he knew there was no escaping the humiliation. Not tonight, not ever. Finally, with a sharp inhale, Charles shoved back his chair. The legs scraped loudly against the marble floor, breaking through the applause. He grabbed his coat with trembling hands, his movements sharp and jerky. His assistant stood immediately, whispering again, "Let's go, sir." Charles didn't answer. He didn't thank the staff, didn't offer a parting word, didn't even look up. His eyes stayed glued to the floor as he stormed out, his face still burning with shame. The applause faded behind him, replaced by the faint sound of laughter and murmurs of disbelief. The glass doors swung open, and just like that, the billionaire who had entered the restaurant with arrogance and entitlement left. As a man stripped of power, outside the city buzzed on as if nothing had happened. But inside Le Magnifique, everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. A billionaire had been silenced, not by another man of wealth, not by a politician or rival, but by a woman who refused to sell her dignity for his money. And as the doors closed behind Charles Sterling, The applause slowly faded into a quiet sense of respect for Maya, for her courage, and for the truth she had spoken. That night, the billionaire left in shame. But Maya? She walked back to work with her head higher than ever, proving that self-respect will always command more power than money ever could. The lesson that lasted. By the time Charles Sterling stormed out of Le Magnifique that night, his pride was already shattered. But the humiliation didn't end at the restaurant's doors. Several customers, unable to resist documenting what they had just witnessed, had quietly recorded parts of the confrontation on their phones. Clips of Maya's bold words and Charles's stunned silence were uploaded to social media before he even reached his limousine. And once the internet got hold of them, there was no stopping the storm. By dawn, hashtags were trending. Waitress vs. Billionaire. Respect can't be bought. And Maya speaks truth. The video spread like wildfire across platforms: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, each clip gathering millions of views. The headlines were brutal and direct. Billionaire humiliated by waitress in public showdown. Arrogant mogul silenced after disrespecting restaurant worker. Money can't buy dignity. Viral clip proves it. For years, whispers of Charles Sterling's arrogance had lingered in the shadows. Employees spoke of his temper. Business rivals hinted at his cruelty, and women who crossed his path described his entitlement. But there had never been evidence, nothing the public could see. Until now, and now the proof was undeniable. Business partners began to distance themselves overnight. One hotel chain quietly canceled a merger. Investors pulled out of deals, citing reputation concerns. News outlets replayed the viral clip again and again, dissecting every detail. Commentators on talk shows shook their heads, calling him the perfect example of how power corrupts. But perhaps the most devastating blow came from social media itself. Memes mocked his stunned silence. Jokes about the billionaire, who got schooled by a waitress, flooded the internet. His carefully crafted image as a charismatic, unstoppable tycoon was shattered in less than 24 hours. For the first time, Charles realized his wealth couldn't erase the truth. Money could buy him headlines, but not respect. It could buy him assistance, but not loyalty. It could buy him restaurants, but not the dignity of the people inside them. And as Charles hid from the public eye, Maya's life began to change in ways she never imagined. At first, she was just doing her job again, serving tables, taking orders, cleaning up plates. But people began showing up at Le Magnifique, not just for the food, but for her. Customers asked to sit in her section. Strangers shook her hand, thanking her for standing up to arrogance. Parents brought their daughters to meet her, telling them, "This is what strength looks like." The restaurant owner, who had also seen the viral clip, praised her publicly. Maya showed not only professionalism but courage, he told a local news station. She reminded us all that respect must go both ways. Job offers soon flooded in. Companies wanted her as a brand ambassador. Charities wanted her as a spokesperson. And even universities reached out asking her to speak at events about dignity and self-respect. When interviewed later, reporters often asked the same question: "How did you find the courage to stand up to a billionaire?" Maya always gave the same calm, unwavering reply: "Respect is not something money can buy. It's something you earn. And I refuse to let anyone take mine away." Her words resonated deeply, echoing across cultures and communities. People shared her quote online, printing it on posters, using it in classrooms, repeating it in workplaces. She became more than just a waitress. She became a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, courage and dignity can still win. Meanwhile, Charles Sterling faded into a shadow of his former self. Boardrooms grew cold, invitations stopped arriving, and whispers turned to ridicule. The billionaire who once thought he owned everything discovered the painful truth. Power without respect is nothing. That single night had changed everything. Charles Sterling learned the hard way that arrogance comes with consequences. That wealth can open doors, but it cannot silence truth. That people might fear money, but they admire courage more. And Maya? She proved that a woman with self-respect is stronger than any man with arrogance. She showed the world that dignity shines brighter than diamonds, that courage speaks louder than wealth, and that even in the grandest halls of luxury, the greatest power belongs not to the rich, but to the righteous. In the end, it wasn't Charles's billions that people remembered. It wasn't his hotels or his empire. It was Maya, the waitress who stood tall, spoke truth, and reminded the world that money can never purchase the most valuable thing of all, respect. And if you enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because more eye-opening stories like this one are coming your way, and you won't want to miss them.